honor of Dr. Ishrat Hussain, published by Oxford University Press, and the launch of Dr. Ishrat Hussain's biography, Unraveling Gordian Knots, the Works and Worlds of Dr. Ishrat Hussain, authored by Mr. Siptain Naqvi. I'm extremely grateful that you all have taken out time of your busy schedules to be part of the event today, and the fact that it was extremely hot, but you guys still managed to make it. Before we commence the session, allow me to briefly introduce our esteemed panelists. First of all, of course, man of the hour, Dr. Ishrat Hussain. Until recently, he was Federal Minister and Advisor to the Prime Minister. He had earlier served as Dean and Director IBA, Chairman, National Commission for Government Reforms, and Governor of Pakistan's Central Bank. Dr. Hussain had a distinguished career at the World Bank for over 2 decades. He's recipient of Hilal-e-Imtiaz and Nishan-e-Imtiaz, Central Bank Governor of the Year, and Asian Banker Lifetime Achievement Award. He's authored more than 24 books, 34 chapters, and 40 journal articles. We're also honored to have with us Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, who's the chairman of the Rural Support Programs Network. He's a pioneer of the rural support programs in Pakistan, a community-driven development approach. He initiated the Aga Khan Rural Support Program in 1982, and afterwards steered various programs in Pakistan, India, and South Asia, touching the lives of millions of rural poor. Mr. Harun Sharif has also joined us here today. He's a Pakistani economist who served as the Minister and Chairman, Board of Investment. Prior to this, Harun Saab served as the Regional Advisor to the World Bank Group for South Asia and remains Senior Regional Advisor to the UK's Department for International Development. Senator Dr. Sania Nishtar is also going to be joining us in a bit. She's caught up in another meeting. She's a member of the Senate of Pakistan. She previously served as Minister and Special Assistant of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, where she held the cabinet portfolio of poverty alleviation. In that role, she was also responsible for implementing ESAS program. She is founder of the NGO Heartfile and has received many international awards for her work and is widely published. Dr. Shaista Suhail currently serves as Executive Director of the Higher Education Commission of Pakistan. She has worked for the government of Pakistan in various capacities for 28 years, including as Special Secretary Cabinet, Federal Secretary Statistics, and Federal Secretary Poverty Alleviation and Social Safety Division. Ambassador Riaz Mohammad Khan Saab has also joined us. He served for 40 years in the Pakistan Foreign Service. He was ambassador to China and the European Union. He has also remained a renowned scholar at Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., and fellow of Institute of Study of Diplomacy, Georgetown University. Ambassador Shafqat Khil Saab is chairperson, SDPI's Board of Governors chairperson. He also worked as Deputy Executive Director at the United Nations Environment Program and as Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. He was also elected as President of the United Nations Environment Program's Governing Council and was also the Chief Negotiator for G77 countries in preparatory meetings of the Second World Summit on Human Settlements. Mr. Siptain Naqvi is an independent researcher and author and focuses on institutional and cultural history. A frequent contributor to Pakistan's English newspapers, Naqvi's research has been presented in Oxford, Cambridge, Columbia, and other international institutions. Mr. Naqvi is on the board of Strengthening Participatory Organization and was a founding member of Habib University. Dr. Abid Qayyum Suleri is Executive Director of SDPI. At present, he serves on different policy-making forums and advisory boards, including Advisory Council of Planning Commission of Pakistan and Pakistan Climate Change Council. He is convener of National Coordination Committee on Agricultural Transformation and a member of Board of Directors of National Disaster Risk Management Fund. Lastly, but not the least, of course, we have Dr. Vakar Ahmed, who is Joint Executive Director at STPI. He's a board member at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Sorry? I'm so sorry, sir. So we also have with us Dr. Tariq Banoori. Apologies for not introducing you. He was a former Executive Director of the Higher Education Commission. Thank you so much, sir, for being part of the panel. Former Chairperson of the Higher Education Commission. Yes. And then Dr. Vakar Ahmed, who is a board member of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment and Trade. He's also one of the editors of Festschrift, which is being launched today in honor of Dr. Ishrat Hussain. So thank you very much for bearing with me. And with that, I would like to hand over to Dr. Abid for his welcome remarks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Mahnur. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, my very dear colleagues who edited this book in honor of Dr. Ishrat Hussain, Dr. Vakar Ahmed and his team, and Mr. Sultan Nafisab. A very warm welcome to you for this very special event that we held today. We thought of having two books launched, one that was compiled by STPI and the second that was written by Mr. Sultan Naqvi. Now, before we move forward, I'll just briefly introduce Ishrat Hussain sir. Although his name needs no introduction in Pakistan, however, I would like to introduce Dr. Hussain through his work. And my reference point is his flagship book, Pakistan, The Economy of an Elitist State. I could see this book there. You can get hold of a signed copy by him if you buy it from the Oxford and Liberty Books, of course. Now, in this book, he sounds revolutionary and an opponent of the status quo when substantiating the argument that Pakistan's economy is in the clutches of a narrow elite comprising 1 to 2% from the top. So he writes, and I read from one of the paragraphs of the book, only those who possess assets can benefit from market resources. The markets are rigged by the elite since the state is politically controlled by the same elite for promoting their parochial agenda. The elites get bank loans and never repay, grab their choice urban land at concessional rates, and secure permits and licenses to set up their businesses without paying a single penny. They know how to conceal income to evade taxes, misclassify the value of imports and real estate in connivance with government officials. Now, his strive for a progressive, humanitarian, and exploitation-free society doesn't only confine to diagnosing the problem, but also proposes a solution. So he outlined financial, educational, and judicial reform to set Pakistan free from the elite capture. In his view, only these reforms can liberate Pakistan from the stranglehold of a small elite and ensure that the benefits of economic growth are shared by most of the population, particularly those in the lower income and social strata. However, his distinction lies in the fact that unlike many of us, he doesn't have the luxury of packing his bag and sleeping peacefully after giving policy recommendations. In fact, he does the opposite by accepting the challenge to implement what he proposes and consistently led by example. Hussain believes that financial sector reforms are a must for inclusive growth and got the opportunity to reform the financial sector of Pakistan through his stint as governor of the State Bank of Pakistan from 1995 to 2005. During his tenure, the banking sector was completely transformed and open to competition for bringing about efficiency, soundness, and profitability from subsidized support. However, privatization of the banking sector sends a strong regulator with high-quality human resources, technology, and simplified business processes would have led to a major failure. To keep the private banks aligned with national objectives and protect the depositors, he had to first bring his own house in order, that is, introduce reform in the State Bank of Pakistan, and he did it in a perfect manner. This is why today there are now 30 PhDs and numerous foreign degree holders at the State Bank of Pakistan. So when he took over, there was only one PhD at the bank. Now, he joined the charge of Governor State Bank when Pakistan was under huge sanctions after the nuclear blast. In the year 2000, so Pakistan was on the verge of bankruptcy. With Hussein's efforts, the country not only earned credibility from the World Bank, but also accumulated over $12 billion in its foreign exchange reserves. After this, the World Bank declared Pakistan as one of the top 10 reformers. The second set of reform that he believes can help in ending the elite capture is educational reform. He got an opportunity to develop a prototype for formal reforms in higher education as Dean and Director of Pakistan's oldest graduate business school, the Institute of Business Administration. His struggle to transform IBA into an institute of higher learning was unmatched, where he played the role of a mentor of the mentors. To materialize his dream to include IBA among the top 100 global business schools, he realigned the institute's program with the best international practices, keeping in view local educational needs and circumstances. After a stint at State Bank of Pakistan and before his appointment as the director of IBA, he was appointed as Chairman National Commission for Government Reforms with the status of a federal minister. The NCGR was tasked with producing analysis and recommendations on how the government, its institutions, and infrastructure could become more effective to meet the social, economic, and political challenge that Pakistan faces in the 21st century. The Commission took 2 years to produce a comprehensive report, which covered the restructuring of government at the federal and provincial level, strengthening of the district government, reorganization of civil services, revamping of human resource management policies and practices, and re-engineering of business process. The change in government didn't allow him to implement these reforms. However, that report came handy when he was picked by former government as advisor for institutional reform and austerity with the status of a federal minister. This provided him the opportunity to pursue his unfinished agenda of the NCGR. His vision for institutional reforms mainly emphasizes the change in overall governance structure of the country, since it's a fundamental problem which has caused deterioration in the institutions. He prepared an institutional reform bill that may be divided into 3 phases to cater to the governance-related problems: restructuring and strengthening of key institutions of economic governance, reorganizing the federal government, and reforms in the civil service. This time, Hussain moved incrementally, getting each component deliberated and approved by the political leadership. This incremental process has its own drawbacks, particularly in a country where patience and perseverance are in short supply and people expect results overnight. However, Dr. Ishrat Hussain was successful in bringing about some reforms in the government before he moved out from the government, and he thought to contribute his independent analysis through academic writings and through his writing in the mainstream media. Other areas of Hussain's interest include food security, climate change, food, energy, water nexus, and regional collaboration. Through his writings, he keeps highlighting the importance of tackling climate change, which may threaten our food, energy, and water security. He is a staunch advocate of regional cooperation and believes that CPEC and Belt and Road Initiative has the potential to uplift not only the economy of Pakistan, but the economies of this region, especially to boost and make the basis of a strong regional trade integration. His introduction would remain incomplete without mentioning his distinguished career spanning over 2 decades at the World Bank. Among the key positions he held at the bank were resident representative to Nigeria, head of the Debt and International Finance Division, chief economist for Africa, chief economist for East Asia and Pacific region, including China, director of the Poverty and Social Department, and in 1997 was named the country director for Central Asia Republic. I have a special regard for Dr. Saab, even if he didn't have the above mentioned professional achievements to his credit. He is a gem of a person, an excellent human being with a caring heart who believes in grooming leaders among his team members rather than increasing the numbers of his followers. He is not an ungrateful person and believes in paying back through grooming and through career building, which is evident from the fact that despite many opportunities, he never thought of settling abroad. During my last 2 decades of association with him, I was present in the meetings that he was chairing. We were co-panelists, and I had the honor of moderating the sessions where he was a keynote speaker. To him, what is being said is more important than who's saying it. I have seen him appreciating the youth and endorsing their ideas when they had a point. He knows the art of agreeing to disagree in an amicable manner when he has a difference of opinion with someone. He tries to explain his point of view without losing his patience and temper when someone disagrees with him. I also had the chance of traveling with him and can vouch for the fact that he can discuss fiction, movies, music, literature, and cuisine as eloquently as he would discuss economy and reform. I'm extremely grateful to him for his special patronage of the organization that I represent, STPI. I cannot remember any instance where we requested his time for a seminar, lecture, and he refused. That simply shows the importance he gives to sustainable development. I wish him all the success for his latest mission, agenda of institution reform, and hoping him many more accomplishments in life in his new innings that he's playing now as an independent player. Thank you very much, Dr. for joining us here.
Thank you, Dr. Abid, for those remarks. With that, I'd like to invite Dr. Vakar Ahmed on stage. He'll be talking about the book that has been published by Oxford University Press.
Thank you, Mahnoor. Let me join Dr. Suleri in thanking our guests today. I'm here to briefly introduce the Festschrift, which is here in front of us today. So to start with, of course, my gratitude to all those who have contributed their essays as part of this Festschrift in honor of Dr. Ishrat Hussain Saab. Something that makes this effort unique was the contribution by younger economists and social scientists who were provided an opportunity to write on welfare, growth, and reforms, with particular reference to Dr. Ishrat's work and how reforms spearheaded under his leadership could be extended by the younger practitioners now in the practice of public policy and economic management. Any effort to compile essays focusing on economy, welfare, reforms in Pakistan proved to be a daunting task amid COVID-19, and that was the time duration during which these essays were submitted. The authors who have contributed faced a world never seen before. As the timeline of pandemic prolonged, so did the uncertainties associated with economic recovery scenarios. Almost everything from economic growth to job creation, structural reforms, bringing SDGs on track, were now linked to medical solutions and how fast these could reach the masses and heal the economy. This volume carries a lot of policy relevance, as Ishrat Saab, being an important part of the government, continued to play an important role in envisaging the way forward for the economy and institutional reforms. Our approach to deciding specific themes of chapters which go into this Festschrift was three-pronged. First, we carefully identified areas of immediate concern for Pakistan's economy. Most of these areas, for example, the management of government budget, also presented opportunities. Second, we narrowed down this list and focused on themes where Ishrat Saab was able to contribute in various capacities inside and outside of the public sector. Third, we spent a significant amount of time searching for authors who were an authority to write on these themes. Most chapters, therefore, go beyond a standard Festschrift approach, and readers will note how various authors have presented their own evidence-based perspective as well. For ease of reference, we have grouped these chapters into macro management, financial markets, provincial economic reform, regional integration and trade, and human development, including women's economic empowerment, on which Dr. Saab had worked throughout his life. Equally important is to note that most chapters are a result of contributors' own research and updated literature review, and at places in-depth interviews with relevant stakeholders, including Dr. Ishrat Saab. An example of this is the chapter by my colleague Ali Salman and Beenish Javed from Prime Institute, and their chapter is a result of several rounds of National Debt Conference organized by their institute, and their contribution explains how Pakistani economists, including Ishrat Saab, have approached the domestic and external debt challenge. Our contribution by Zafar Hayat from IMF banks on his years of research and how State Bank of Pakistan's role in the economy could contribute to greater price stability. Some of these sentiments are also shared by Fatma Jinnah Women University's Dean, Dr. Bushra Yasmin, who presents reasons which prevent good quality foreign direct investment. These suggestions complement those presented in the chapter by Planning Commission's Hamid Mahmood Sahab, who stresses on increasing efficiency of public investment under PSTP and provincial ADPs. Almost all chapters under the macroeconomic management underscore the need for stronger institutions, an area which is dealt separately in Shakil Ahmed's chapter from UNDP. Under the state of subnational economy, Professor Abdus Salam Lodi of Bhutan's Balochistan paints an accurate picture of a province which carries so much potential waiting to be harnessed through the correction in priorities of elites in his province, and relates to what Dr. Suleri was discussing about Dr. Ishrat's earlier book as well. Professor Saranjam Beg of Karakoram University highlights how, as the world stopped during the pandemic, there were travel restrictions. Gilgit-Baltistan provided unprecedented economic activity in the form of domestic tourism. The chapters on the economies of Punjab and Sindh and Dr. Ishrat's contribution in these two provinces were contributed by our two chief economists at Planning and Development Departments in Lahore and Karachi, Dr. Amanullah and Dr. Naeem Zafar Sahab. Ishrat Sahab's work on financial markets and how these have evolved over time was captured by Mr. Fahim Sardar Sahab, now with the Prime Minister's office. He had, of course, witnessed this across his career. A subset of this discussion is then undertaken at length in chapters by Mr. Ahmed Ali Siddiqui of IBA, who explains the factors behind growth in Islamic banking and finance in Pakistan. Staying with the financial sector reform, the need for stronger financial inclusion and women entrepreneurship and Ishrat Saab's role in these realms is stressed by Dr. Hadia Majid of LUMS and Dr. Muhammad Arif of International Islamic University. Opening up the financial markets presented opportunities for trade and investment integration, which were further expanded by the possibility of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, an area covered by Dr. Ghulam Samad and Ghulam Nabi of PITE, Dr. Liaquat Ali Shah of CPEC Authority, and my colleague Maz Javed from SDPI. It will not be fair if I don't acknowledge Dr. Tariq Banori, our founding executive director, Johannes Lin of Brookings Institute, and Dr. Suleri, who have contributed their personal impressions to this Festschrift, including their experience of working with Ishrat Saab and how that work has culminated to favorable outcomes. And before I move to the last part of my speech, I do understand that some of the authors of these essays in honor of Ishrat Saab are here. If I can just ask them to just stand up on their wherever they are, so that we can have a round of applause for them, please. Last but not the least, apart from acknowledging the untiring efforts of Ishrat Saab, almost all contributors in this Festschrift present to you a message of great hope, despite of all what is happening or what happened during the pandemic years during which these essays were being written. Authors have noted that the country and people hold significant promise, and Dr. Ishrat's work has inspired them to write that since a decade and a half, the state has been strengthened due to the democratic rule. People have voted for change twice during these years. All forms of institutions have played a responsible role in bringing order and continuing improvements to executive and legislative branches in the country. Civil society institutions, including policy think tanks and non-profit organizations, have exhibited a stronger practice of social accountability. Private sector, despite of all the difficulties, has been guided by Ishrat Saab and has contributed to revival of exports, value addition, and productivity. The deregulation of media has allowed it to transform into a stronger vertical of democracy. And having over 60% of population still comprising of youth, and youth which has far more access to education than the past generations, far more digitally connected, has more opportunities for entrepreneurship, and continue to push for growth in new economic activities or vistas indicated or shown by Ishrat Saab during his career. It is, of course, now up to us to learn from the 75 years of history and move forward with these select episodes of success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vakar, for letting us know what the Festschrift is all about. I'm sorry that pronouncing it. But secondly, we have another book that we're launching, Unraveling Gordian Knots. So I'd like to invite Siptin Naqvi to please speak on it. If you want, you can remain seated there and speak there if you want.
I would like to be here because I look taller this way. Maru, thank you for your gracious introduction in the face of such esteemed speakers. It seems almost too gracious, but thank you. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, Ambassador Riaz, Mohammad Khan Sahab, Shoaib Sultan Sahab, Harun Sharif Sahab, Shaista Swell Saiba, Ambassador Shafkat Khakakhel, Dr. Abud Saleri, Dr. Vakar Ahmed, esteemed guests and online audience members. A very good evening to all of you. I'd like to start off by thanking SDPI for arranging this book launch, the second book launch, as Vakar said, and as Manu said, and for allowing me the privilege and opportunity to address this audience and the speakers. I'm anxious to hear what they have to also say about the book, so I'll try to keep it very short. This book comes as a direct corollary from another book, which is the IBA history, which I authored in 2015. It was printed and published and launched in the same year. Ishrat Saab was at that time the Dean and Director of IBA. I had first known about him in my student days when he was a governor of State Bank, and we used to read about his reforms in the State Bank through Dawn's, EBR, and other publications. Of course, he was signing the currency notes, so we knew about him. We wanted currency notes. And during the course of the IBA history book, I learned more about his work in other sectors, and over dinners and tea and whatnot. And I thought that he's led a very, very interesting life, and it would be wonderful if I could write about it. And eventually I did get the chance, and I'm very grateful for it. Now, the book covers different aspects. It starts off from Ishrat Saab's life in Agra, where he was born, and then came to Pakistan, and all the way up till his last assignment as advisor to the Prime Minister on institutional reforms and austerity. It covers periods when Pakistan was at crossroads, whether it is the separation of East Pakistan, or the military dictatorships, or changing of the economy, or turn of the State Bank, and various things. It was also written at a time when Pakistan was at crossroads. So it was written at the time of COVID, previous government was in place, Pakistan was going through a new era, we all believe that. And now that it's being launched, we're again at crossroads with both economic and political storms surrounding Pakistan. So it's a bit timely because there are some lessons in the book that policymakers and researchers, decision makers can learn from and address these things. Now, about the title, it's slightly complicated. Unraveling Gordian Knots. It's a bit of a tongue twister. As you can see, I'm also struggling saying it. But it harks back to Alexander the Great, who was confronted with a Gordian knot somewhere in modern-day Turkey. And he was asked to sort of open the knot and prove that he's a great conqueror. So Alexander, being Alexander, just took out his sword and just cut through the knot. And he said, there you go, I'm the great emperor. But unlike Alexander, Ishrat Saab doesn't use a sword. He keeps facing Gordian knots, whether in the civil services or in the World Bank, State Bank, education, institutional reform. These are all very, very complicated areas. But what he does is that he, instead of slashing Gordian knots, he unravels them very delicately, without upsetting the order, taking people with him, collaborating, mentoring, all of those things. So that's why I named this book Unraveling Gordian Knots. Now, Ishrat Saab has led a very rich life. In fact, I'm tempted to say that he's lived several lives in the course of his 80 years. He's seen momentous events in Pakistan's history. He's turned around African and Central Asian economies as a world banker. He transformed the State Bank and took Pakistan's economy from the depths of despair to one of its most glorious periods in the past 75 years. He then was asked to do civil service reforms, which was difficult. He was asked by President Musharraf. He transformed a public educational institution which had been going through a decline, and he completely turned it around. He was awarded the Nishan-e-Imtiaz. Then he was asked to reform institutions like PIA and SBP. He set up a governance structure and set up new institutions. He's written books. He's written articles, he's written monographs, and he's a very, very popular speaker in public demand here and in outside Pakistan. So civil servant, world banker, educationist, seal reformer, writer. Now this is more that most people do in one lifetime. So we are really honoring a remarkable individual. There's so much to unpack, but I tried to put it together. The challenge was that Ishrat Saab is extremely modest. So what would be a saga, he would sort of compress it into a sentence. And then I had to ask his friends, family, his collaborators to please give me more information. Whether I've succeeded in capturing his great life in the book, that only the readers can tell me about, but I tried. Now, I had some very specific reasons why I wanted to write about this book, other than the fact that Ishrat Saab's life is very interesting. So about a decade ago, I read a book called Why Nations Fail. And from childhood, I was sort of thinking about Pakistan's development and why the country doesn't work. I used to travel to India, here not, and I would see things happening. And Pakistan was sort of soldiering on, but we would take 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. So I started thinking about development, and I started thinking about this great man or great woman theory that we have in this country, in which we expect a messiah to come along and wave a wand and then wish away everything that's wrong with the country. Now, what this book, Why Nations Fail, it says that countries develop on the basis of their strong institutions like SDPI and others. And Pakistan's decline is basically the decline of its public institutions, especially. So there was a time when we had functioning institutions like PIDC, PIK, QABDA, and others that would take the country along. We lost that. And through his life, I was able to study the institutions which play a very important role in the country's development. So civil services, which is the execution arm of the State Bank, which controls in many ways the country's economy, the IBA, which is higher education, which produces both corporate leadership as well as national leadership, and institutional reforms. How do you save, how do you salvage, how do you transform, how do you build new institutions? And through the course of this, I got a better sense of what institutional reform is, why we need the institutions, and what we can do about it. And so I'm hoping that the reader will also pick these lessons. The second reason was that, unfortunately, we live in a pretty benighted age. So I grew up with my father talking about great role models, both in and outside Pakistan. Martin Luther King, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Josh Malyabadi, Malcolm X, Ho Chi Minh. I mean, there were many, many that he could pick on. My generation, and I'm afraid the generation that's coming up in universities and in institutions, they don't have many people they can look up to. So we have a crisis of leadership. We have a crisis of role models. And in this state, in this sort of despondent state, when you get someone like Ishrat Hussain, who we can admire unabashedly, learn from, and look up to, it's incumbent upon us to document his life, not just for ourselves, but for the coming generation, so they can read about it, that this country has had its challenges, but at the same time, it has been able to produce people who have started life from a fairly middle-class background, not an elite background, but have been able to go on to do great things for the country, for its people. The third reason is sort of connected to the second one, and that is inspiration. I think inspiration does great things. It can drive people to do things which seem impossible. You can't borrow it or steal it. It has to come from within. But in despondency, at a time when the younger generation faces both colonial baggage and post-colonial baggage and hears about Pakistan as this almost failed state, as a country that's been going through challenges. They pick up Time magazine and they hear that Karachi is the world's worst city or something or the other. They need inspiration, and that inspiration comes from learning about someone who's gone through several challenges, faced adversity, both in Pakistan and outside Pakistan, both professionally as well as on many different levels. And then get inspired to do their bit for society, for themselves, for their careers, for the country. So I got a lot of lessons from this: how to use soft power, how to be a transformative leader, how to inspire young people. And my own experience with him and through the course of writing the book inspired me a lot. This book was mostly written during COVID. I had done the research, but COVID came. And we thought the end of the world is coming. Nobody knew when the vaccine is going to come. And we were all worried about the economy. I know I was worried about my job. And in these sort of times of doom and gloom, when things seem very dark, this book kept me going. And Ishrat Saab's examples kept me going. One thing that he really inspired me was that when I came to Islamabad in the course of this research, I met a federal minister and I asked him for the interview, and he had invited me over. So I came to his office, but when he saw me, he said, you know, who are you? Why are you writing this book? You're not qualified to write it, and I'll speak to Ishrat about this. So I said, okay, let's carry the interview, and he agreed. I came back to Karachi. I messaged Dr. Ishrat. Ishrat Sir was at the time in Woodrow Wilson. He was in Washington, D.C. I sent him a WhatsApp. He immediately called me and he said, yes, what's on your mind? And I told him that, you know, I met this minister. Minister Saab said, I'm underqualified. I should not be writing this book. Maybe he's right. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe you should give it to someone more senior. You don't owe me anything, and I'm willing to hand over my notes, my recordings, everything that I have. So we should move on. Ishrat Saab said that, in fact, that gentleman has already called him, given him this feedback, but he told him that I should write that book. And I should write that book because young people should be given chances. If young people are not given the chance to write a book or make a movie or head a company, then how will they move on with life? So someone has to write the book, and why not me? And that inspiration was able to carry me forward through multiple jobs, multiple personal challenges, COVID, all of that, to the point where finally it came and it's here and it's being launched. And once again, thank you for SDPI for doing this. And I'm hoping that by reading this book, other people, especially younger people, especially people who need that inspiration, who are starting their careers, starting their professional lives or their personal lives, are able to get that inspiration and contribute to society and the country the way Ishrat Saab has done. Once again, Ishrat Saab, thank you for the honor, thank you for the privilege, thank you for the opportunity. And audience, thank you for your time. Shukriya.
Thank you, Sipten, for letting us know what the book is all about. And might I add, quite a befitting analogy that you've drawn between Ishrat Saab and Alexander the Great for your title. Moving further, I'd like to invite on stage Madam Ishrat Hussain. Madam, please, over to you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you ever so much, Manur. And thank you to SDPI for having invited me to this event. And most respected Dr. Ishrat Hussain, Dr. Tariq Banori, Ambassador Riaz Muhammad Khan, Dr. Shuaib Sultan Khan, Sipten Naqvi Sahib, Dr. Vakar Ahmed, and my old friend, Dr. Abid Saleri. It's really an honor to have been invited to this event to celebrate the achievements of an iconic figure, Dr. Ishrat Hussain. He wouldn't remember, but ever since I joined civil service, I've been running across him in various meetings, and we always found him very serious, to the point, and he's an excellent listener. So my previous speakers have been sharing their views about him, and I'll try to dwell on those which they've not mentioned. So Dr. Ishrat Hussain is exactly what a civil servant should have been. All of us, if we had been following his footsteps, then perhaps the destiny of Pakistan would have been different. And today we would not have been confronted with the worst kind of economic growth figures and issues which our government is facing today. So having said that, I'll go back to these two books, which are really interesting. And when I was a student, I always liked reading biographies and autobiographies. And this turned out to be really, really very interesting. So, Saptan, you've done an excellent job. I really enjoyed it, and it was so gripping. I was reading it between my work quickly. I only got hold of it the other day from Mr. Books. And it speaks of the young Dr. Ishrat Hussain, and when he was a child, even then, his parents felt that he was really gifted. And he finished his graduation and his education 2 years before even qualifying for the age to appear in the CSS exam. And he had to wait and work as a faculty member in the University of Sindh to become eligible to appear for the exam. And he's from the very sort of glorified 1964 batch of civil servants. And he's written another book, and I was fortunate enough to have a copy. He's written many books, in fact. And in that book, I read something which answered one of my misgivings, which as a DMG officer I had developed way back in 2000, 2001, when the police system was sort of, made independent. And prior to that, the magistracy used to be writing their annual confidential reports, and the police used to report to the magistrate. So much so that if there was a law and order situation, the magistrate could only, give orders to fire, otherwise the police could not. So I thought that the Police Act had in fact thrown out the baby with the bathwater. But in his book, Dr. Ishrat Hussain clarified that look at the motorway police. The government didn't have money to, engage the best of the best, hire the best of the best from the market for this force. So they asked all the provincial governments to, send their reserves. And they sent those who weren't doing at all well. And it turned out that they turned into one of the best forces in the country at that time. Even today, motorway police is doing so well. So he argues that it is not incentives, it is not money which is wanting, it's something else which is there, which makes people work hard. So in Dr. Ishrat Hussain's life, we see that he has this ability to not only focus and work hard, but it is not for personal gains and benefits. Rather, he wants to work for humanity. He wants to work for others. And I think that is what is missing in our education. And now when I am working in HEC, and I look at the students, and I look at how, materialism has sort of prevailed over everything. It's okay. So these are the values which are missing. So like Sapten was saying, all this documentation is very important. And I'd suggest that the students, I will be writing to the students, and we should be sending this book to them so that they get a chance to look at it and see that there are other things in life and you have to live for others. And that is what is driving him. And over 8 decades of his life, it's really been an impressive contribution. And I think that that is why today he's being, we are celebrating this, his achievements. And I'd like to end on Ahmed Faraz's couplet, which I really like. And he's done exactly what Ahmed Faraz says here. शिकवा जुल्म ते शब से तो कहीं बेहतर था कि सब अपने हिस्से की शम्मा कोई जलाते जाते. So I wish him all the very best, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam, for those extremely insightful remarks. Moving further on, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan.
Might all be surprised, but I know Dr. Ishrat Hussain for the last 57 years. You might well ask, how come? He had joined the Civil Service Academy after joining the Civil Service, and I happened to be about 9 years senior to him in service, so I was the deputy director. And I cannot claim any credit to what Ishrat's achievements are. Because at the academy, my contribution was only teaching him revenue law and making sure that he gets at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning to go for riding. Because the rationale was that if you can control a horse, you can control a mob. As deputy director, I was also in charge of administration. But I must say that Ishrat was one of the best probationers. I never called him for a dressing down, which I had to do often. There's no other probationer here except Mahmood I'm seeing. So it was very good, very serious, and in fact, he had a very bright future in the civil service. But Ishrat was interested in economic policy right from the beginning. And he thought that the best place for that is the World Bank. And at the right time, he took 18 months leave from government to go and learn something at the World Bank. But the World Bank was so impressed by him that they offered him a job. And I think Ishrat still didn't want to leave the service, and he wanted to extend his service, his leave. And The establishment secretary, who was a stickler, he was not prepared to give him leave, although he had been offered a job in the World Bank. But fortunately, he was overruled, and Ishrat was given leave to join the civil service, the World Bank. I think Ishrat's decision was right, because if he would have stayed on in the civil service, he might have become a very good civil servant. But he would not have been able to do what he did, not only for Pakistan, but for the whole world. In fact, his achievements in the World Bank in different countries are still being quoted. But I really owe a special debt of gratitude to Ishrat, because in 1972, when I was Commissioner Karachi and the post was abolished, because the government thought that it was a very powerful post, and ministers and MPs felt that they have no powers and no patronage. Of course, the post was abolished, and it was revived later on after 3 years in a diluted form. But I decided at that time to change my career, in the sense that I was impressed by Dr. Hamid Khan when I saw him working in Comilla, where I was Assistant Commissioner. And I got myself posted as Director of the Pakistan Academy for Rural Development, Peshawar. And there I started something on the lines what Dr. Hamid Khan had done at Comilla. And fortunately for me, Dr. Hamid Khan, who was a visiting professor at Michigan State University, when he received my reports, what I was doing, I was developing a program called Dawood Project. He came back from Michigan and helped me implement that. Now, somehow the other people thought, especially those who didn't like what I was doing, that I was organizing the Pakhtuns, and maybe it was to subvert the government. I was made an officer on a special duty, and an FIA team came to inquire into all that. Of course, there was nothing what they could find against me. But I lost heart, and I thought that I should really do something else. And while I was in that dilemma, Ishrat happened to come from World Bank and met me. And when he heard what my problem was, and Dawood had become quite famous, he said that I know someone in the UN Center for Regional Development in Nagoya, and I'll write to them if they would be interested in having you as a consultant. You know, that was the break I was looking in my career. Ishrat doesn't accept it, but I tell you that by getting that consultancy for 6 months, and whatever I had done at Dawood, writing it in the form of a book which was published by Mysore Institute of Development Studies and printed in India, the fame of that book and what I was doing got to UNICEF, and they asked me, why don't you become our development consultant in Sri Lanka? So that 6 months became into years. And from there, then I did not look back. and the rest is history. So Ishrat, you may not accept it, but I owe you a great debt of gratitude. What I have done after that is because of that, what you did to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shoaib Saab. Next, I'd like to invite Banuri Saab to please come up and speak. Sure, sir.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Looking at the long list of speakers, I'll be very brief. I was asked by Vakar to write a contribution for this book, which I did. I think it's called a preface or foreword or something. And I was trying to think of what it should appropriately say. Of course, a lot of things have been about his character, his, contributions in other domains, but I thought it's very important also to bring about one very significant contribution in the domain of economic policy itself. And the metaphor, the phrase that I use, which I attribute to Jeffrey Sachs. Jeff Sachs, in his book, The End of Poverty, he uses a phrase called clinical economist. Clinical economist. Jeffrey Sachs, people know who Jeffrey Sachs is, a very famous economist, has advised many people around the world. His point of view was that a lot of people, supposedly economists, when they are asked to provide some advice, they do so on the basis of their prior theoretical constructs and not really try to understand what the situation is of that particular country. And he contrasted it to something that he called a clinical approach. He says, when you have a doctor, and Jeffrey Sachs's wife is a doctor, he says, if somebody calls her in the middle of the night and says, my child is having this problem, she tries to think that, well, is this person complain a lot? And if they do, she says, well, give him an aspirin and so on. So if it doesn't complain a lot, then maybe this is serious and I better get up and go out there and look at it. You actually need to understand what that context is. And I think this is a fundamental challenge. Those of us who study economics, the fundamental challenge for us is a very simple one. Why are some countries poor and other countries are rich? Why are people in some countries, why are some countries unequal and other countries are not unequal, right? I mean, this is a fundamental challenge. From Adam Smith, this is what we have tried to understand. In the 1980s, we had a huge crisis, very similar to the crisis that we have now. And at that time, I think the orthodoxy went in the direction of what later began to be called the Washington Consensus. Here are a list of recipes. Everybody should apply them, right? And that's the World Bank and the IMF pretty much applied those, and we got a disaster as a result. Whereas when you actually look at the work that Ishrat was doing in Africa, in Central Asia, you realize that what he was trying to do was to come up with an alternative framework. And as I said, the best way of describing it is that of a clinical economist who was trying to understand the existing conditions there and trying to come up with policy formulations which would not only provide them the appropriate recipe, but actually get them to get out of that situation of poverty and get towards a trajectory of prosperity. It was not a very popular one at that time, but I think his both his personality and his background were such that he was able to carry it. When he tried the innovative approaches in Africa, I think they were considered to be somewhat radical, but I think they went along with it. The senior administration of the World Bank went along with it, and he did get very, very positive results. Now, I think when you apply those more generally, you find that this is really the theoretical contribution that he has made, that, The challenge is the same. You have to understand how to make this country get out of this crisis and get on a path of prosperity. And this kind of a cookie cutter approach is not going to do it. You really need to understand what to do and how to do it in order to bring about that change. This introduction, this innovation, at that time, as I said, the orthodoxy was very much going in the direction of the Washington consensus, but a few people were still sticking to their guns and come up with this thing. So that's the first point. I think this is a major contribution, should be recognized. I've written it in the preface in the book for those who are interested. It has some other references there that you might find interesting. The second thing, and I think this goes back to the issues that other speakers have raised, there was a time when we were actually producing such people. There was a time when we were producing people who could formulate our policies based on our circumstances. We had great thinkers, some of whom came from the civil service, people like Wasim Jafri and Imtiazi, A.J.N. Kazi and others. There were also people who came from academic background, but with very strong grounding in public policy making. Right? So that thing has dried up. Every time there's a change of government, we can't find people to manage our economy. We have to go to the World Bank, we have to go to the IMF, sometimes we have to go to the banking sector, but we are not producing the clinical economists who know how to manage the economy and who will enable us to get out of this crisis. I think Pakistan needs to get back into producing those kind of things. We certainly, when I joined the civil service 8 years after Ishrat Saab, that was certainly the mission that we had, how to make this country a better place. And at that time, I think the country was still trying to produce people like that. At some point in time, we have stopped doing it, and the country is the poorer for that. And so I would draw two major lessons from Ishrat's work. One of them is, I think, the very significant contribution that he has made to show us how policy is done. And the second one is for the country itself. Let's better start producing such people again. We can do it. We were doing it at one time. We were on the path to prosperity, and then we gave it up. We have to start doing it again. I thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you very much, Banuri Saab. Next, Harun Saab, if I can request you to, sorry.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, honorable panel members, who are, most of them have much longer association with Dr. Ishrat Hussain than I have, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I am honored and privileged to be standing here to speak about somebody who has helped me grow as a mentor, as a friend, as a senior colleague. So it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here. And particularly, this book, which highlights his works and, his contributions, it will be something which all of us should look at in terms of making a positive contribution. I will not repeat lots of things which have already been said, but my association with Dr. Ishrat Hussain goes back some 25 years of active engagement, but I had known him before as well. So we worked together in early, 25 years back on financial sector reforms when he came as governor of State Bank. I was in Securities and Exchange Commission, and we basically laid out the foundation of a transformation of financial sector in Pakistan. And I'm extremely grateful for his help at that point in time and mentoring, because I was looking after the capital market side and he was bringing changing in the regulatory structure of financial market. Today, what we see our financial market, which was, banks were privatized in late 90s, where they stand, that strength, a lot owes to Dr. Ishrat Hussain's inspiring leadership, his commitment, his hard work, and we must acknowledge that. We did a lot of things at that time, and fortunately, in that period, we did have a lot of policy support behind us as well. And at that point in time, corporatization of banking, making independent governance structures, and basically, focusing on development sectors. People also criticize at times that development economists like Dr. Ishrat Hussain brought a lot of developmental angle in the central bank, whereas central banks were perceived as a financially technical economic bodies who should work on monetary policy and regulatory things only. But I totally support that basically in the environment we live in, as Tariq has said, a clinical economist, you got to understand what is actually needed. And then basically, so I give a lot of credit to Dr. Ishrat Hussain for pioneering the developmental aspect of financial sector in the central bank. So this is something I really wanted to put. And on a lighter tone, actually, he was not really a dry development economist when he was at central bank. Some of the contributions which people don't really acknowledge, he also encouraged and established the State Bank Museum, which is something all of you should go and visit in Karachi and actually see that how a governance structure can work on, institutions in Pakistan. I tried a few years back to fix Lahore and Texla Museum and miserably failed. But I did seek Ishrat Hussain's advice that how did you do that? But these are little islands of excellence which can actually be expanded into, something bigger in our country if, the mindset permits that, and we can take it, forward. Looking back, we have, together worked on financial sector reforms. We recently, I was over a year, he was my senior colleague in the cabinet. We sat in Economic Coordination Committee. We traveled together in the past as well. Met global leaders. When I was regional advisor to the World Bank, we actually interacted with multiple stakeholders within South Asia and Central Asia to look at solutions that what is actually keeping us here. We are stuck. South Asia remains stuck. And to basically unravel, not the Gordian knot, but the South Asia status quo, I really admire Dr. Ishrat Hussain's contributions and reaching out to people. Some of the qualities, all of us, admire him as, somebody larger than life, who has achieved so much in his professional career. But one of the things is that I'm amazed that how, accessible he is. Whenever I, at least in my personal humble opinion, reached him out, wherever he was in the world, he basically responded back and was always there for me. So thank you very much for that very kind, gracious, gesture on your part, because this is a very rare quality for somebody who's been busy in so many things. Second thing which I learned from him, might not practice really, is that his ability to engage with multiple stakeholders, be it government, be it public policy, be it diplomats. I see my friend Riaz Muhammad Khan Saab, Aziz Saab sitting here, be it private sector or international stakeholders. So he would try and understand and reach out to them and engage. And his learning, his quest for learning has always been there. So these are qualities of somebody who should be written about, who we should talk about. And in future, basically, I would like, we need to look at a lot more such examples in our country where the younger professionals can learn from, make up their own mind, analyze, rather than just picking up tailor-made solutions which have been given to us as a recipe for quite a long time, and we have been blindly, following those. In the closing, I would like to say that, first of all, I'm very pleased that he's here with us. And, in life, somebody said, a very long career. I don't think his career has ended, actually. I'm sure Dr. Ishrat Hussain has many goals to achieve. He might not tell us, but those goals he would certainly follow wherever he is. his hard work and commitment have always admired. On a lighter tone, I think you have been doing very serious writing and serious public policy work. But something we all should see is that, the space for serious work in the public policy, political space is shrinking. And that shrinking space, he and I experienced together. But I'm more worried that, bringing in quality professionals in that space is actually shrinking. And maybe we should do some vlog, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, rather than writing about it, or maybe a comic vlog, writing about it. I was mentioning to Tariq Binori and he said it would be a tragic comedy. But I think this is something which these days, in the modern days of communication, would be very, very helpful. In the end, basically, I wish you lots of luck. I wish you good health. I wish I had the energy you have to continue your contribution towards the betterment of Pakistan and the society. But at the same time, I leave this bigger question that lots of us analyze, lots of us try and understand the problems. We also advise and give solutions, and we try and influence the power structures. But I think reflecting back, we need to look at the tools of engagement more pragmatically, that how the world is changing, particularly where populism trumps, serious public policy work. And I would like Dr. Ishrat Hussain in future to actually guide us on his experiences, that, how to make a real contribution and who could be the influencers for change. Once again, I wish you lots of luck. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for joining us. It's been indeed a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harun Saab. Next, first, before I move on to the next speaker, I'd just like to welcome Dr. Sania Nishrat. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. Next, if I could please invite on stage Ambassador Ziaz Muhammad Khan. So over to you. Jaise aapki marzi.
Harun Sharif, Sania Nishtar, who has just joined, Dr. Shaista Suhail, and Dr. Banuri. So thanks for that. For reasons I need not go into, I'm ill prepared to speak about a person whom I always found was always meticulously and very well prepared to speak on whatever he chooses to speak about. I feel this is unfair to Dr. Ishrat Hussain, but I hope he will forgive me. I have known Ishrat over decades, and my admiration for his extraordinary personality, his multiple talents, his vibrant intellect and genius continues to grow. Foremost, I see him as an institutions man. This may be a personal bias because the only book written by him that I have read is Governing the Ungovernable. And there he argues for the centrality of a strong bureaucratic structure for sustained progress in a country. He laments the degradation of our own institutions. Beyond this important piece of writing and prognosis, he has built institutions. He has built IBA, as a world-class institution, as I'm told and I learned about. He transformed the State Bank of Pakistan. He did so applying two time-honored principles. One, merit. Second, trust in institutional integrity. And I greatly respect him for that. I have respected Ishrat as a practical and serious-minded person who values common sense. I have come to believe that these qualities are central to solid achievement rather than any outward smartness or shine. An example, as Governor of State Bank, he managed our reserves to rise from rock bottom to cross double-digit figure in a very short time. I asked him how he accomplished that. His answer, discipline, a steady hand, and purchasing dollars from the market to build reserves. Simple wisdom, which pulled us out of economic doldrums 2 decades ago. I have just seen this biography by Siptan Naqvi. I look forward to reading it, but the title is attractive. It refers to Gordian knot. And these are the qualities which need to cut the Gordian knot, although the title is Unraveling. His varied talents as administrator, as highly regarded educationist, as accomplished economist are evident from his CV. Before taking charge of the State Bank, he had helped a number of developing countries in Africa. This contribution must be a source of great satisfaction to Ishrat, but it ought to be a matter of pride for us in Pakistan. He is, of course, an economist of international renown. There is a galaxy of economists who can appreciate this aspect of his competence. I am just a diplomat, or was. Pakistan is blessed with great number of economists, highly accomplished. But I must say that of late, my faith in economic expertise has been shaken. It is the disconnect between the most impressive pool of talent and the dismal state of economy that we find ourselves in. Why? So our economists, they remind me of handsome swans in a dirty pond, which they cannot cleanse. I also read a story a long time ago about China's development, which in good measure owes to the numerous special economic zones initiated by Shenzhen experiment. Credit for that goes to one gentleman, Shi Chung Shui, an old party cadre and early comrade of Mao, who was not even a high school graduate. In 1980, Deng Xiaoping appointed him as governor of Guangzhou province, which is located opposite Hong Kong, and asked him to lift the province economically. She said that he wanted funds. Deng said he had no funds. But Deng promised that whatever approach he would adopt, he would not interfere. She had consultations and hit upon the idea of Shenzhen inviting overseas Chinese investors, promising them all necessary facilities. A common sense approach with clarity and honesty of purpose, paving the way to the economic miracle of our times. Everyone says that Pakistan has great potential, even the outsiders. And I give you an example. In 1996 in Brussels, we set up an EU-Pakistan Chambers of Commerce and requested a Belgian business tycoon, Guy Ullens, to be co-chair with another Pakistani, because he had invested $60 million in food sector in Pakistan. I asked him why he chose Pakistan. Guy Ullens said his business had looked around. In China, the competition was stiff. In India, bureaucracy was stifling. Therefore, we chose Pakistan. Guy Ullens said that his then he asked me a question. He said, Ambassador, have you seen the physical map of the world? I said, yes. He remarked, tell me how many places are there on earth where there are such large plains and water available. Pakistan has more than 12 times the arable land of Netherlands, which he said earned $20 billion from cut flowers alone. That is why we have taken the risk. But sorry to say, after 10 years, he had to wind up his business in Pakistan. Now I ask a question. Why is it not possible for our economists and other important stakeholders to set up an authoritative platform to draw up well-considered charter for economy for the country and push it as national priority regardless of any government? Or is it too difficult? Our divisions are far too deep to be able to do that. Turning again to Ishrat Hussain, I get the feeling that he has been underutilized. He has been often pushed into the labyrinth of suggesting reforms in a society where political leaders are often supreme and are the law. So these excellent efforts are largely reduced to academic exercises. Hope I am wrong. Ishrat is a hands-on man who accepts challenges, wants to make a difference. He is energetic and full of ideas. I wish he could be given charge of reviving and modernizing our industry and agriculture, of planning our economy and finances, and executing mega projects. But for the time being, I only wish him the best in whatever endeavors he chooses to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Riasa, for your remarks. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Sania Nishtar to please come up on stage and speak.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I have to apologize for coming late. I've recently joined the Commission on Universal Health Coverage of Chatham House. We had our maiden meeting and I thought that it would be important to just join for a little while. Let me right at the very outset congratulate STPI for convening this important meeting and for the Festschrift to celebrate Ishrat Saab's life and works. STPI has emerged as a very important think tank And I want to congratulate Abid for his leadership. I also want to congratulate Ishrat Saab because his life's works and his achievements are being celebrated today, and it's not a matter of just one day. We should do it a lot more often. I worked with Ishrat Saab for the first time when he was chair of the National Commission on Government Reform, the NCGR. And he was responsible for articulating a reform agenda for the government, and he had convened a number of us in various thematic groups, and I was supposed to look after the health thematic group, and that was the first time I worked with him. And I was very impressed by his ability to combine hard work with analytical rigor, with a very practical lens, and come up with solutions that actually had the promise of getting delivered. That was the first time I saw him work, and it was a very rewarding experience. Throughout the years, we've been in touch. We've worked together on many committees. We've been at the World Economic Forum together, God knows how many times. We've weathered the ice and rough weather in Davos together. And over the years, I got to know him and would turn to him for advice on many occasions. More recently, we've been cabinet colleagues for the last 3.5 years. And I'm sure that all of you must have heard about his life and about his works as a central banker, as a celebrated central banker, as a civil servant, as an eminent economist, as an academic, as a governance czar, as a person who had the ability to get things done, and above all, a very good human being. I'm sure the panelists, the eminent panelists must have talked about all these attributes. I want to just dilate a little bit about the work that he did in the government over the last 3.5 years. I think the work that we did was largely undersold, but his work in particular was quite undersold and was underappreciated, because the inherent nature of the work was such that it was not meant to be visible. Reforms at the back end are often not visible, and he often had, I think he had the most difficult part in the cabinet. He did work that was invisible. There was a disincentive on part of many factions to see that work come to fruition and to see it completed. So I really think that his was the most difficult part in the cabinet. Let me just quickly elaborate on what he did, to what extent we were able to take it forward, what are the outstanding things. Basically, his work in the past government can be divided into 4 areas. Reorganization of the federal government was one. Secondly, the reform of the civil service. Thirdly, the re-engineering of business processes. And fourthly, the restructuring of the key public sector organizations of the government. For each area of that work, he would do a scoping, he would present a rationale, he would outline the principles, then he would articulate the approach to the reform and restructuring. He would clearly lay out the objectives, and then he would document things well. He would document what was done and what was outstanding and needed to be done. A lot of the work that he started did actually come to fruition. Some areas of work were deferred for further deliberation, and some were in the consideration pipeline. As far as the work on reconfiguration of the federal government was concerned, we would see him a lot of times making a case to re-engineer and recast the federal government, and to steer it away from the culture of posting transfers and patronage to what the fundamental premise of the federal government was in Pakistan, decentralized polity. And a lot of times we would see him making the case of steering the federal government toward its core objectives, and not just tactical things, toward its core objectives, which is sound economic management, providing a level playing field for trade and investment, regulation, And throughout the course of these 3.5 years, I found him a very strong ally as far as social protection is concerned, which is what my portfolio was. As you all know, we were aggressively pushing the social protection agenda under SARS, a wide-ranging program. And I always found him to be an ally and would turn to him for advice, whether it was about targeting decisions or institutional restructuring. And he would always make the case for separation between regulation, the operations, and policy making. So this was the overarching umbrella under which he would see the federal government. Now, in line with this, there were many reforms that he pushed for. What should be the number of ministries that we should have in the federal government? How should they be staffed? What should be the incentive structures? How to look at performance management? What about accountability? He went down quite to the granular level, looking at the intersectoral arrangements, intersectoral convening arrangements, what to do with the office of the cabinet secretary, how to optimally use the secretary's committee for better coordination, what to do with the different tiers of the government, how to abolish the 6 and come to 3, how to abolish posts. So this was a remit of his work under the first umbrella, which was the re-engineering of the federal government. The second area of his work was business process engineering. And there he did far-reaching work to revise the rules of business and to update the ESTA code. This is painstaking work. This is not work that you do standing on a podium, making speeches, being visible. This is painstaking back-end work where you look at every comma and full stop in every line and paragraph, and you analyze its implications, and then you recommend changes, and then you actually make a case and you fight a case in front of your cabinet colleagues, in front of the bureaucracy, and try to explain to them what the impact of these changes would be. In terms of delegation of power, I think there were some very important things done under his leadership to truly delegate power, because delegation of financial powers is the ultimate delegation of authority. That's where the delegation of authority comes from. And I'm not sure how many of you know that the Public Finance Management Act was actually shepherded under his leadership. The Public Finance Management Act was a very important piece of legislation. It gave us not just the TSA, the Treasury Single Account rules, but under the rubric of the Public Finance Management Act, the powers, the authorities were delegated to the principal accounting officers in ways that had never been done before. The Office of the Finance Advisor was done away with, and it was replaced by the Chief Financial and Audit Officer. And also in the similar vein of delegation of powers, he did far-reaching work to revamp the instrument of the PSDP and the PC1s, both in terms of redefining the limits, so but also the ease of approvals and the ease of administration of the instrument of the PSDP and the PC1. And I think that these two norms that were changed under his leadership really helped strengthen the hands of the principal accounting officers, who are the operational heads of the ministries. The third pillar of his work was the civil service reform. And as far as the civil service and the human resource side of the government was concerned, his reform centered both on the quantitative aspect, the qualitative aspect, the training aspect, both pre-service training, in-service training, ongoing education. His reforms also spanned career planning, pay and compensation, early retirement, service rules, performance management, and incentives and accountability. So through a range of different instruments, he touched upon all these different endpoints. I think the performance-based system which was introduced under his leadership and with the collaboration of our colleague, the advisor establishment, Shahzad Arbab, was a very robust system. And I hope that the next government will continue with this, because under the new performance management system, each ministry was supposed to come up with goals. And each ministry was supposed to then cut through those goals into a number of different indicators. And those indicators were time-bound and outcome-based, and there were priorities articulated and priorities spec'd with those indicators. And there was a 3-month review mechanism where all line ministries would come to the table and present their performance against something that was very concrete, against something that was quantifiable and that was measurable. And over the last 3 years, over the last year in particular, that mechanism really improved, because there was a first review and then there was a second review, and the second review really strengthened the process, both in terms of the size and shape and color of the indicators, as well as the means of measurement. And some of us actually had institutional arrangements to support the delivery. For instance, and I don't mean to be self-reflective here, in the Ministry of Social Protection, I had what was called a delivery unit, which was properly staffed, which had the tools and the mechanisms. And the delivery unit would cater to my work plan, which was called the SAPM's work plan. And then there was another stream called the Prime Minister's Agreement, where the entire gamut of indicators and factors factored, which Ishrat Saab and Shahzad Arbab used to monitor on a quarterly basis. And then we were given ranks based on that. I think that this was a very wide-ranging reform, which was actually institutionalized in earnest, and which is living even today. And I hope that the new government will continue and further improve it. One of the other things that Ishrat Saab would not just talk about, but actually pegged into policy and got underway with its execution was security, the tenure security. I personally am a firm believer that the institution of the secretary in the government of Pakistan is a very strong institution. And if the secretary in a ministry has clean hands, is honest, knows his job, and is willing to engage and perform well, there is nothing on earth that will derail the sector. And Ishrat Saab really talked again and again about this habit of certain political governments and certain political actors to get grade 21s into the roles of secretaries, and then by choice arm twist them into making decisions that a grade 22 would not. And I think that the security of tenure policy, which was espoused under Ishrat Saab's leadership, had a great rationale. And I hope that it will continue to be respected by incoming governments. Then there were the efficiency and disciplinary rules, which we sadly see being watered down. Then there was the MP and the SSP policy, on which he did a lot of hard work. And he would guide us all in cabinet meetings and on one-on-one meetings on how to do the recruitments and how to ensure they were merit-based. Some of us followed that advice in earnest. One of the other policies that he espoused under the broad rubric of HR was the early retirement policy. This was another policy aimed at improving performance to ensure that those who were not performing well within civil service structures actually could be held to account, and that the secretary or the principal accounting officer had some levers in his hand to make a case for early retirement after a due process. It was a very difficult reform to push forward, and in many cabinet meetings we saw that there was appetite to gauge progress. And I think that process must continue, because it is a very good tool to compel performance. Then, of course, he paved the way for ministries to have technical advisors. So there was a process prescribed where every minister could have a technical advisor if the minister was not technically grounded in the subject. Also, as part of as part of the PFM Act and more broadly, he paved the way for internal audit departments to be created within some ministries and internal audit officers to be appointed. These are far-reaching changes. If you join the dots, the whole gamut of training institutes was changed. He espoused the notion of integrated human resource management in the establishment division and a revamp of the establishment code rather than the establishment division being just a post office. His thinking about the separation of cadres and the civil service, the Pakistan National Executive Service and its division into 4 is something that emerged from his work in NCGR and I think about 15 years ago. And of course, there was stiff resistance to reforms, to well thought out reforms of this kind. Increasingly in his work, we saw that there were organized vested interest groups who would stall the process. But just to complement and to say how far-reaching his work was. So we've talked about reorganization of the federal government, the second pillar, the business process re-engineering, the third pillar, the civil service reform. And then, of course, there was the Pandora box of the restructuring of the organization. Pakistan had 441 public sector enterprises. He was given this very difficult task of restructuring them. And I saw how painstakingly he would convene meeting after meeting after meeting, and how difficult people like myself who were responsible for line ministries would make his life by going and telling him, we don't want this institution closed, we don't want this institution moved, we don't want our people. So that all of us who were responsible for portfolios would go to him and plead our own case. But he had the job of cutting the federal government to size, scaling down this huge body of 441 institutions. He was able to bring it down to 334. He would do a stock take, would present a plan, and he had 6 options. Either an institution would stay autonomous as it is, or it would stay as a body, as its law meant it to be, or it would be put on the privatization list, or it would be merged with another, or it would be sent to the provinces, or it would be liquidated and ground up. So there were these 6 options, and I saw over the last 3 years the painstaking hard work that he did to do this work, which is totally invisible. And it was just like walking against the wind. There were many changes made, many reforms, and of course, reform is not an on-off. It's not a one-time process. It's an iterative process. It's a journey. And although the press might not have picked it up a lot, but there is a list of organizations where a number of important changes were made: PIA, Pakistan Railways, FBR, the Competition Commission, the Evacuee Trust, CEA, CDA, PCSIR, PATCO, PICRIT, the Halal Food Authority, NPCWR. So these were some of the salient things that I can recall off the top of my head. But of course, his job was very difficult. And I think that he put an enormous amount of hard work. And I don't think anybody else could have done this. He combined integrity with intellect, with hard work, with practical pragmatism, and the ability to do things. It was totally unique. There were some things where we saw, and Ishrat Saab will bear me out, where we saw a terrible pushback by people who are political people. One was then the abolition of vacant posts in BS 1 to 16. He would again and again say that the government system is very bloated. 95% of the government functionaries are 95, or was it 85? 95 of the government functionaries are actually BS 1 to 16. In this day and age, did I need 4 naib qasids when I was sending emails I didn't need naib qasids in this day and age. There was no need for one person to be there to pick my bag. I was perfectly able to do that on my own, as were the others. And he would make the case again and again that the government system is bloated because 95% of our HR is BS 1 to 16, and there are posts that are vacant, and we need to abolish them because these pave the way for political patronage and for political appointment. And today, as a senator, I see committee after committee, the first thing that any new government raises and will continue to raise are the BS 1 to 16 posts, to the detriment of other substantive policy agendas, which urgently need to be discussed. So if you go to national food security, we will not discuss the critical issues, the looming food security crisis. We will discuss BS 1 to 16. If we go to IT and telecom, we will not discuss what's on the anvil in terms of the auction of the next spectrum and the opportunity that the country has to progress. We will discuss BS 1 to 16. And this man would raise it again and again and again, and would come across a stumbling block every time. We weren't able to make a headway, and it wasn't because of want of his trying. The second thing that where we were not able to collectively make headway was reducing the number of the ministries. He advocated that we should have 33 ministries and not 42, and there was a perfect rationale for that in Pakistan's decentralized post 18th Amendment polity. He made a very strong case for that, but of course, more ministries mean more ministers, mean more patronage, and clearly there was no headway there. Then there were the powers and functions of the autonomous bodies was a very contentious matter. And having headed an autonomous body, I know how tenuous this is. What are the prerogatives of a board, of an autonomous body? Who audits the board? What about service rules, and how do they do their procurements? And this was an area of reform where we continue to go in circles, because clearly there were lots of vested interests. The CSS examination and his efforts to revamp this was another area where it was just like walking against the wind. And then, of course, the power sharing between the ministers and the secretaries. I would see him bring this again and again to the table. So these few things we as a government did not make headway on, not because he did not try. So I once again want to thank you, Ishrat Saab, for being what you are, for mentoring so many of us, and for being a role model with your integrity, with your hard work, and with your humility. I hope you will always be there for us, and I hope that the state of Pakistan will find a way of benefiting more from your abilities. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Rania, for your remarks. Next, I'd like to invite on the podium Dr. Ishrat himself. Over to you, sir.
My teacher and mentor, Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, my friends and colleagues on the podium, as well as I see a lot of friends. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm both overwhelmed and humbled by the kind and very generous sentiments which have been expressed. I don't think I deserve any one of them, but it is extremely nice of SDPI and Abid and Shafkat and Vakar to organize this particular function. Not because it is giving a tribute to a person, but in this country, we are very stingy in celebrating the lives of our legends or of the people who have made contribution. We are very effusive in finding faults with everyone. And SDPI, by giving these Living Legends Awards, organizing events like this deserves our commendation for pacing the way for celebration of those who have really done something for this country's sake. I want to thank Saptan Naqvi for his very laborious, hard work in producing this biography. He had job, but also he interviewed more than 50 people all over the world. And he has the recordings of all those to substantiate whatever has been written in this book, because you never know, somebody can turn around and say, hey, I didn't say that, I said something else. So he wanted to make it, very, very clear that he has the evidence behind it. I'm also grateful to Vakar, who is a very busy and one of our budding, promising economists, that he could spare time to lead this team for producing this particular book. What pleased me a great deal was that he assembled a team of not the usual suspects, the kind of economists Riaz Muhammad Khan was mentioning, but young, promising people who are not known to anyone. And how would you be known if your work is not put out in public domain? And then it is up to the readers to decide whether this is worth pursuing, whether it is worth encouraging or not. And we always fail in doing that. We only patronize the Khalifas like me in order to come to the stage and talk about it, and also patronize our writings. But the future of this country lies in the young professional economists. So my appeal through this forum to the young economists is that you have to build your credentials first as rigorous empirical economists who have done hard work, collected primary data, carried out surveys, and don't get tempted by instantaneous overnight quest for fame, where you write columns in the newspapers and appear on the television. There is an opportunity cost for that. You will not be able to concentrate on your serious empirical research work. I find this tendency among our young economists. They all feel that they should become celebrity overnight. Yes, you will become celebrity, but wait for your turn when you have made certain contribution for this country. People will come and recognize you and chase you for this. So this is my humble request to the young economists. I wanted to dwell on a theme which has been expressed here. And Tariq Banouri in his preface also referred to the concept of the clinical economist. In many countries I have worked with, I find there's a free exchange of economists who have done research or who have been in academic profession, and then they join the government. And after a while, they come back to the academia. Now, this has two distinct advantages in my view, and I'm saying this from my practical experience. The policy making, public policy making, improves its quality because it is based on certain evidence, certain empirical work, which the economists bring to the table. We don't get swept away by the fads and the fashions of the day. So there is a role of the economists who contribute to the quality of the public policy making. They may not succeed. I'm not saying that they may always succeed, as Sanya very elaborately, and I'm very much amazed at her memory of the entire 3 years work we did. we face obstacles, but we should not get so discouraged that we give up. So they will come across this, but also the fact that they will come back to the academia or the think tanks. And I'm saying this because I'm addressing from the platform of a think tank, which is really dealing with the applied economic, social, environmental problems of Pakistan. That they will be better off realizing the practical problems, difficulties, constraints, and that feedback will improve the quality of the research. It will be more pragmatic, it will be more practical oriented, it will be more solution oriented rather than writing in the journals for just the impact factor. And I think this interaction between the government and the research and academia and the think tanks is something which is par excellence in the United States, but even in a country like Indonesia, I have seen this, that the economics faculty members of the university in Jakarta, in Bandung, are invited to become members of the cabinet. And then after the cabinet reshuffle, they go back and do the research. And the quality of the research which I've seen is much better than their joining the government before. So here we have compartmentalization. Here we have verticals, and there is no interaction between it. And that's why I wanted to demolish these boundaries, and I wanted induction for technical experts, not only economists, but scientists, engineers, doctors, and all other professionals in the various echelons of the government. But here, those, and I belong to that particular group, who want to preserve their entitlement, there is no appetite for allowing this induction of talent at all levels. And I related to you, and this is a case study which LUMS teaches to its students, that the transformation of the State Bank of Pakistan took place by a very innovative model where the induction was at the entry level, it was at the middle level, management level, and it was at the highest level. And they argue that the reason is that if you have new blood coming in at OG2 or the entry level, they would not be able to contribute anything because they will be under a hierarchical, machinery where they will get the orders from the middle managers and the heads of the departments who are not really inclined. If you only take the middle managers, they will be squeezed between the top managers and the entry level because the top managers want them to do a certain way and the entry level people want to go some other way. So they are totally lost and they are not very effective. But if you bring in both at the top level and the middle level and allow your own staff to compete with the outsiders on merit, then there is a rejuvenation within the institution and you have infusion of new talent and new blood, which really gives a vitality to the organization. It's like a stagnant pool of water. If you don't keep on recharging that pool with fresh water, it will start stinking. The same thing happens to organizations. If you do not bring in people who are talented, who are able to make contribution to the policy making, you would have a status quo or you would have stagnation. And that's what we are suffering from today. But those efforts, as Sania pointed out, meets a lot of resistance because of the status quo mentality of some of our colleagues. So this interchange, in my view, is extremely important. We have to demolish the boundaries which separate us and place us in different verticals and what I call as compartments. My training as a civil servant really gave me the impetus for my thinking on development. And I have two contrasting experiences. I started my first position as the Assistant Commissioner in Shikarpur, which is a feudal holding of the first order, where the zamindars and the jagirdars and the vaderas control the lives of the peasants. And the amount of inequality, amount of dependence, amount of harassment, and lack of dignity for the human life was very, very apparent to me. And then I was posted in a subdivision in East Pakistan at that time called Patwa Khali, which was completely isolated from the rest of the country. It had only water around it. And I saw the grim poverty prevailing in that subdivision. 1 million people who could not afford to come to the headquarters in order to get their genuine work done. And I had to travel in my own boat, in my launch, in order to visit all the villages 21 days. And the kind of poverty I saw led me to reformulate my own thinking. And then I was very fortunate to being exposed to Akhtar Hamid Saab at Kumilla. And then I followed it up with Shoaib Sultan Saab in Dawsi experiment. And that took me to formulate my development model, which is the book, The Economy of a Military State. And having worked as the chief economist of East Asia, I discovered that there is an alternative model, which is the shared growth model, where the benefits of growth are widely shared across the majority of the population. And this is something which I have documented. And if those of you who read my columns in the news, there were 4 articles which I made on the East Asian economy. And that is not only for, 10 years or 20 years. This is a record of 1960 to 2020. What other solid empirical evidence would you like to have? That yes, there is an alternative model where the poor, downtrodden, vulnerable people can actually benefit from economic growth. And that is where I come from. And that, as most of the speakers have pointed out, is the framework of my thinking as far as the future of Pakistan is concerned. I will keep on trying. I have done whatever I want to do, not always successfully, but I will not give up. And I'll keep on flagging this particular model for wider acceptance in this country. And institutions like SDPI and other think tanks, like Ali Salman's think tank and others, should make efforts in order to popularize this particular model, which has very strong empirical roots. We should all work together. हमारे think tanks भी जो हैं वो भी compartments में काम करते हैं. They don't work together. They don't realize that collaboration and teamwork is a force multiplier. And that really produces much better results than everybody going in their own direction. So I would very much hope that the think tanks, including PIDE, which is a government think tank, should put their act together and work on disseminating this particular model. I don't want to take much time because it has been more than 2 hours and you've been very patient. I'll just, because there are some young people, I want to leave a thought with you. I see a lot of negativity, a lot of cynicism, a lot of despondency, which has been passed on from us, our generation. But let me also tell you that if you don't have a positive attitude, if you don't have a can-do kind of attitude, you've already given up. You will never try. Forget about whether you will succeed or you will fail, but you will never try because you've already determined nothing good will come out. And if all of us suffer from this negativity and cynicism, who is going to take this country forward in this challenging environment of 21st century? So keep a positive outlook. There are challenges, no doubt about it. There are difficulties. And I personally am a witness that I have met challenges at every single point in my professional life. But I never gave up. I tried and tried. And that from a 24-year-old Flight Lieutenant Rawlings in Ghana who assumed power as the president and who was going to destroy, in my view, and it's a personal view, who was going to destroy the country, a beautiful country of Ghana, I was able to convince him that there is an alternate path in which his campaign against corruption, which he was obsessed with, that's why he came to power, can be tackled by a different set of economic policies. And Ghana became a star performer in Africa. To Babangida in Nigeria, again a dictator, military dictator, who felt that IMF was a kiss of death and we should not do anything with the IMF. And I took the risk at the cost of my own job. My senior vice president, Ernie Stern, very difficult person, said, if you fail in implementing or getting implemented what the Nigerian government is doing, you will be sacked. I said, I'm prepared to do that. And Nigeria did bite the bullet and came out quite strongly till Abacha came. And once Abacha came, it was business as usual. Similarly, in the Tajikistan and Azerbaijan, where they had just come out of the Soviet rule, where everything from cradle to grave was guaranteed by the government, we established a central bank, professional, separated commercial banking as a first step for allocating resources in an efficient manner. These were not easy tasks. These were very difficult tasks. I failed in Uzbekistan, one of the largest country in Central Asia. And Mr. Islam Karimov felt that he was the best president in the whole world. So I, as a tiny little functionary of the World Bank, could not come and tell him what to do. But now Uzbekistan is really doing very well. So these are challenges, and we will meet the challenges. So you will succeed somewhere, you will fail. But my appeal to the younger generation is get rid of this whole apparatus of thinking which gives rise to cynicism and negativity. Otherwise, the future is bleak for you and for the country. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here and to the SCPI for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishrat, for your remarks. Your advice to the younger generation is quite important and valuable, and your experiences are quite an inspiration, I must say. Last but not the least, of course, Ambassador Shafkat Kakakhil, if I may invite you for your closing remarks and vote of thanks.
Dear friends, it has indeed been a great pleasure and a great honor to have been invited to this extremely important and instructive discussion. We've had comments and speeches by truly distinguished personalities who's better, more qualified than I can ever be. They have further illuminated the different facets and dimensions of the remarkable life and career of one of our most distinguished compatriots. I'm sure Hussain has, in his reasonably voluminous biography, divided Ishrat's life and work in 8 chapters. When I was trying to compose my ideas, I broadly saw his public career spanning about almost 6 decades in 3 distinct phases. The first was 15 years in the premier job that any young person could aspire to get. Ishrat joined the civil service of Pakistan at a fairly young age, 23, and stayed for 15 years, during which, as he mentioned, he served in both what is now Bangladesh and West Pakistan, and got a direct exposure to the challenges, to the socio-economic challenges that Pakistan was faced with. During these 15 years, he got an opportunity of further cementing and of augmenting his academic qualifications by going to William College and Boston University, where he got a master's in development economics and a PhD from Boston. He also has attended courses in Harvard, Stanford, and that renowned business school outside Paris, NCR. Ishrat seems to have chosen his jobs very well, because after knowing the situation in his own country and securing the necessary intellectual provinces, he joined the World Bank, where he stayed for 20 years. He could have stayed for another 2 or 3 years, but he took a voluntary retirement in 1999. Ishrat was one of the few World Bank officials who either dealt with at the headquarters or actually lived in all the 3.
parts of the global south. He actually lived in Africa. He mentioned Accra and Nigeria. He also did reports on the challenges of Africa. I'm sure he saw the striking similarities between Africa and Pakistan. The most important being the abundance of resources and the total lack of commitment on the part of the elite. And it's because of the lack of commitment on the part of the elite that Africa, Central Asia, and Latin America have not been able to match the spectacular progress that East Asians have made. The tiger economies of East Asia, simply because the elite of those countries were not driven like the elite of Africa and Pakistan by personal greed. So on return from the World Bank, he again chose his jobs very, very carefully. He joined the State Bank of Pakistan, and reference has been made to the phenomenal reforms that he carried out in that premier financial institution of the country. He then joined the IBA as a dean, and the IBA has the distinction of producing some of the first generation, the leading people in the first generation of Pakistani business leaders. They include my brothers and my son-in-law. If you trace the careers of IBA graduates, most of them have achieved great eminence. And what he has done to the IBA was unimaginable. 2 campuses, he's transformed what was an institute into a much larger academic entity, almost a disciplinary university. He introduced Chinese language at the IBA, probably the only young graduates in Pakistan who have a smattering of the Chinese language. And after I met him during his work at the IBA, and when in 2011 I was asked by the UN Department for Sustainable Development, then headed by Tariq Banouri, to serve as a consultant for Pakistan's preparatory process for the Rio Plus 20 meeting. And now, recently, the international community has been celebrating Rio Plus 30. And this was the Rio conference was the place where the international community forged a consensus on 3 important pillars: climate change, biodiversity, and the paradigm of sustainable development, synthesizing and mixing the 3 key components: sustained economic growth, social equity, and environmental protection and development. And the first, my job was to hold civil society consultations to get the civil society inputs into the preparatory process. And Ishrat surprised me by his most enthusiastic response when I called him asking him if we could organize the meeting at IBA. And his admin and protocol guy, a retired naval officer, provided tremendous support to all the participants. Ishrat himself spoke and set the trend for the discussions. When we were preparing our report, I also benefited from his essay, Pakistan at 64. This is an amazing article. He also did one on Pakistan at 65 in 2012, where he took figures from a special issue of the Time magazine, how Pakistan started with literally 100 megawatts of electricity, with a very limited number of roads and so-called industrial units, which were basically cotton ginning units, and brought them up to date, but then added a warning that we should not think that our job is over. We need to consolidate and we need to carry out fundamental reforms in order to sustain our gains and build up on our achievements. I have followed, I have read his important books on economy of the elite state, as well as governing the ungovernable. But I'm not going to go into the details for the simple reason that there is just no time. But if I were to sum up and interpret the key determinants and drivers of Ishrat's intellectual evolution and public life, I would identify four. The first one is a relentless intellectual curiosity, which drives him to look at almost every issue, every topic. There is nothing in social sciences or humanities that is not of interest to Ishrat Hussain. The second one is his focus not only on the substance but also detail, which accounts for the quality of his work, whether it's India-Pakistan trade, whether it is any other topic. He goes to the bottom of things to bring out what other researchers and policy advisors ignore. Yet another quality, which I'm glad he hasn't given up, is his incorrigible optimism. I have never read an article of Ishrat Hussain where he has said there is no possibility of an improvement. Ishrat Hussain sees chances, opportunities of improvement and reform in everything that he discusses. And above all, to conclude, his abiding and unwavering commitment to Pakistan and to the socio-economic welfare of the people of Pakistan. And I thank you. And I wish to thank SDPI for organizing this event, and I wish to particularly thank the eminent panelists who have given so much of our time and have illuminated the key aspects of Ishrat Hussain's thought, his work, and his contributions. And I join Sania Nishtar and Harun Sharif in expressing the hope that he may have. I remember he told me I had decided to stop active public life at 80. So while he may have resigned from his political position, I hope that he will continue to take interest in this country's welfare. This country needs him. And he's one of our key assets, and I hope we continue to have the benefit of his advice and counsel and guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kakakil Saab. And yes, I'd like to join him in thanking all the panelists for taking out their valuable time and being here, and the participants, of course, as well. A round of applause for the panel, please. With that, I'd like to conclude this session. It was quite an honor to be moderating it today. Before we move on to book signing, we'd just like to have a quick group photo of the panelists, and then, of course, book signing will be followed by refreshments. Thank you very much.
ग्रुप फोटो के लिए स्टेज के सामने जरा पैनलिस्ट हजरात से दरखास्त है।